Hello, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon of SIGGRAPH Day 2 here at the Maxon booth, where we are showcasing amazing artists and how they use Maxon 1 tools to create some of the most stunning visuals on any screen, anywhere in the world. So to my left, I was happy to meet this gentleman under the most auspicious of circumstances, and that was the Beeple Deathmatch that happened earlier this year. I think was it March?
May.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
All right, so it just happened a little while ago. It was an amazing competition. Definitely check it out. Take a look at the Twitter threads. You can see all the entries. But this gentleman came out on top, beating even some of his own mentors. Let's give a big round of Maxon warm welcome for Josh Brockett.
Thank you. Yeah, I just got to thank Maxon too for bringing me out and inviting me, and let me present about something that I'm really passionate about, and that's awesome. So let's get started. This is going to be just a talk about the everyday process. So I'll explain it a little bit more a bit later. But I'm Joshua Brockett. I'm a freelance 3D artist. I do a lot of like concept art, album art, album visualizers, and stuff like that. And more of a 3D generalist, but what I'm most known for is this project I do called Everydays, which I just make a daily piece of art every day and I've been doing it for about 5 years. So that's what I'm known for. I post on Instagram a lot, and here's some of my work. These are just a few I've done recently. There's some more. And this is like the past kind of year. And then this is all of them that I've done so far. This is the first time I made some sort of collage like this for this presentation, and it's really weird to see everything that I've done. And it feels kind of small. This is like 5 years of my life, so I don't know, it feels weird, but super cool. And so why I started doing Everydays, the main reason was just to get better. I was really into film and visual effects, and I was doing a bunch of After Effects stuff, video Copilot tutorials. I'm sure a lot of people kind of went down the same kind of pipeline, and eventually I kind of heard about 3D and Cinema 4D specifically. And so just doing that, like I just wanted to get better at it. So I spent like a week learning. It was a Chris Schmidt tutorial, and I spent like a week learning all the ins and outs of cinema that I could, and then stumbled upon Everydays. And that was, Beeple was my inspiration. He's been doing them for a really long time. There's another slide that I'll get to with him. But the second reason was to get over the fear of creating. And this was really big for me because like when I was first starting out, or before I even got into 3D, I was a really creative person. Like I did a lot of like projects and like I said, After Effects stuff and video stuff. But the problem was I never put anything out, and I didn't really finish anything because I was just so like worried and caught up in my own head about making something that's good enough, or if something wasn't good, like I'd start an idea and then I would be like, this isn't going to work the way I wanted it to, and that kind of those negative thoughts really hindered me from creating. And so with the Everydays, kind of going on to the next point here, to force deadlines. You got to put something out every day, and it doesn't matter if you don't like it, it doesn't matter if you don't think it's very good. You just got to put it out, and it's really, really helpful to get over that. And then the other thing about deadlines that's really, really nice is I think it kind of forces you to work a little harder and be a little bit more focused, and also helps you get over creative block. Like there's a bunch of times where it's like 11 p.m. at night and I just want to go to bed, but I got to do my everyday, and I'm sitting there at the blank screen, and I'm going to come up with an idea really quick because I just want to go to bed. So I'm going to start moving shapes around, coming up with some sort of composition, and yeah, it really helps for that. And then getting your work out there is also really important. Just posting it, and for the first year of Everydays that I did, pretty much only 5 people knew about it, like friends and family. And but that support that I got from them and that feedback was really important because every like month or so, they'd see like, oh yeah, you're really getting better. Like I really like that render you did, and that positive feedback is just super important as an artist. So then Beeple, like I said, he was my inspiration to start. He's been doing them for over 17 years. And then, like Matthias was saying, he hosted a digital art deathmatch in May, and I ended up winning the whole thing, which was just insane. And it was 4 rounds, judged on Twitter. Each round had a theme and a time limit, and it was all kind of centered around AI, the themes. And this is the poster for the event, and then these are the 4 pieces that I made, going from top left to bottom right. And so that was crazy. And just being able to meet all these artists, like I said, that I followed for so long, and like have taught me a lot of what I know, like David Ariev, EJ from iDesign, Nick Campbell, Grayscale Gorilla, Josh Pierce. I mean, so many amazing artists that I loved their work for so long, and it was just amazing to be able to meet them. And then the other reason, before I get into this, the other reason that I started Everydays and Beeple was a big inspiration was because his kind of philosophy on art, and it was a lot of just like, don't put art on such a high pedestal, and you just got to sit down every day and create, and that's how you're going to get better. So I'm actually going to be doing a live every day, and just a few things that I wanted to mention before I get into it. The worst thing you can do is like stare at a blank screen, especially if you're doing like Everydays, and you're going to hear that word a lot, so sorry. But if you're doing like this kind of project, this series, time management is a really big thing. You got to somehow get it into work every single day for you. So staring at a blank screen, like trying to come up with an idea for like 30 minutes is really just going to hinder you. And then just classic, like looking up images and references for inspiration, colors, composition, any sort of style you like, even like a color scheme, like a blue and white color scheme you might see, and then all of a sudden you're doing something like on a beach, like with white sand and a blue sky. So, and then trying not to pick too broad of an idea. It's definitely good to start with like if you wanted to do like a sci-fi city, that's, like I said, that's a good start, but it's better to have an idea of like, oh, it's going to be like this big cityscape with a really long like pathway through the city to like a giant tower in the middle that's all lit up. That's going to give you a way better head start. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Cinema 4D here. And I always start with a plane. I don't know why. It just feels right to me, even though we are going to be using this as our floor. But before I get started too, I wanted to take a second and point out the content browser that's in Cinema 4D. And this is really awesome. There's so many different things in here. There's like models, there's textures, there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Like there's this motion capture data, HDRIs, and then if you use Redshift, which I'm going to be using Redshift for this, there's all the models and stuff. They come in with like Redshift textures already kind of there. And so you don't even have to do any texturing. It's just like drag and drop. Like you bring these assets in, and especially if you're doing Everydays or a consistent series, you want to be really quick. And so having like a good asset library is super helpful to be able to just bring things in and not have to do a bunch of like the manual work. So the content browser is great. Definitely check it out. But okay, so we're going to kind of go through. I always start with like composition and assets, getting those together first. You can't really have your composition without all your assets. So, and the idea that I want to do is it's just going to be like like these like sci-fi pods, like circular pods that people can go into or something. And there's going to be like a really long line of them, like that like just extends out. It's going to be really large scale, and so that's the idea. And so first thing we're going to do is kind of start to make these pods. And all of this stuff is really simple. I don't have a bunch of time here, so I'm just trying to keep things as simple as possible, and also to show you that you really don't need a bunch of like technical skill to know all the little tools and software to start making some stuff that looks really kind of interesting. So we're just going to take a sphere, and we're going to take a cylinder. And we're going to bool out the sphere with the cylinder just to create like an opening. And then I'm going to increase the segments. And I apologize if I don't go through every little thing here. Most of it's really simple. It's just kind of moving stuff around. But okay, so we got this. We're not going to really see inside of it, so I'm not too worried if it doesn't go all the way through. But this is just our pod. And with texturing, there's going to be a lot more additional detail to this. But one thing I wanted to add also was sort of like a little frame for the outside, just to give it something else. So we're just going to add in a torus here and shrink it down to kind of match this as best we can. And then I'm going to throw it in a atom array and change this radius down. Whoops, that's the wrong way. Something like that. And then reduce these segments so it gets more like just like a wire frame or like a metal frame, kind of like truss scaffolding look. I'm just going to line this up as best I can. And with the everydays and just like making art quickly, it's really not, I consider a lot of these just like sketches. So not everything has to be perfect and like, add all this super detail. You're just trying to get like a general vibe or idea, something that looks pretty cool. And so I'm not too worried if things are intersecting or anything like that. But that's fine. All right, so that's pretty much the pod. That's like the main thing we want to do. But what we want to do now is add in a cloner. And I'm going to group these together with Alt-G. And just call that pod. I'll drop that in the cloner. And I want it to be a linear in the X direction. Something like that. And then turn on render instances so there's not a bunch of geometry being cloned a bunch of times. And just do that so we have a long line of them. And then I'm just going to take this plane and expand it a little bit. And before I do anything else, I'm going to go into my render settings. And I'm going to set this ratio. This is what I usually use. It's like a vertical resolution. It's like the Instagram ratio, so this is what I mainly use when I create stuff. And then I'm going to go in, and before I open up the render viewer, I'm just going to create a redshift camera and kind of frame up my shot here. And I like to use really long lenses. I feel like it gives it a little bit, I always go for more of like a painterly look. And so I feel like because it kind of compresses the image, it feels a little bit more painterly, a little bit less 3D. But that's all just personal preference and how you want the shot to come out. So I'm just going to frame it up, something like this. We can adjust it a little bit more later too. And save this real quick before it crashes and it's not a good time. Okay. So now that we have our composition, let me take this floor and just duplicate it out a little bit more so it covers our whole scene. All right. So now that we have our kind of our general composition that we want, now we're going to move on to texturing and lighting. So I'm going to open up the Redshift render viewer. Just place it on the side there. And then if you press Shift V, it brings up like the viewport details. And you can go into the safe frames and you can adjust it so you can kind of get a better idea of how your frame is in the viewport. Let's render that out, and it's going to look pretty weird because there's no lights in here. So before I get on to the lighting, I'm just going to add one quick area light so we can see what we're doing. Just bring that up and then bring the exposure down a little bit. But okay. So now I want to texture the floor. And to do that, I will create a Redshift standard material. And open up the node editor. And I have these two textures in here that I use. These are actually Beeple's textures. He released a bunch of project files, and you can download the assets and use them for free. So one of them is just this sci-fi Greeble texture that I use all the time. Just a bunch of little details. And then the other is just this like grungy roughness map. And we're just going to use that to add stuff into the floor, like details into the floor. So I'm going to take these two, bring them over. And this roughness map, I'm just going to plug right into the roughness channel. And then the sci-fi Greeble texture is going to go into the bump. But before we put it into the bump map, we actually need another node called bump map. And we need to kind of connect those two. Okay. So let me try and see what we're doing here. Okay, so the scale is really, really off. Let's go into the textures themselves and remap the scale to like 5, 5, and 5. And we'll do the same thing for the sci-fi Greeble stuff. Okay, so that's looking good, but now I want to kind of dial these in a little bit more. And to do that, I'm going to add a ramp node in between the roughness map and the roughness input. And that just gives us a gradient to play with for this roughness channel, because how it works is all the black values are really shiny and all the white values are super rough. So now we have this gradient. We could push this black value a lot higher, and you can see it. There's a lot more reflections in the ground. And there's some texturing issues. Like if I had more time, I would try and clean this up and make sure there's no repeating textures. But for what this is going to be, it's not a big deal. And so push those up a little, and then I'm going to bring the white value down so it's not so rough at the top. Okay. That's good. And then I'm going to rename this floor and just duplicate it and call this one pod. And I'll drop it on there. And now this is way too reflective for what I want, so I'll open up the pod texture and then go back to this ramp and bring this black value all the way back up to something like this, and this back up as well. And so now those pods are a lot more rough, but some of that detail is still there. And then for these two, I might even just use the same, roughness map and plug it into the color or the diffuse, and then add another ramp to kind of control that as well. And I don't want it so dark. So now we got some, again, there's repeating textures here, but now we got some sort of a little bit more detail just by using the same map, in the roughness and the diffuse. And all the sci-fi texture stuff is there too. So I'm just going to duplicate that one more time, call this like wireframe. And I'm not even really going to mess with that. I'm just going to place it on there. And then also add our texture to the cylinder, the bool, so it's textured on the inside of those spheres as well. Okay, so we kind of got our textures. Again, you can always mess with this later. And we're going to work on the lighting now. Now, the lighting's going to be pretty simple, but I know I want to add volumetrics to this as well. So a lot of like overhead lighting I found works best. Kind of what we have now, but so I'm just going to take with this light and duplicate it. So that's kind of covered. We might not even see that far, but okay. So now, now that we have our lighting roughly where we want it, let me take these lights and raise them up, maybe. Okay. So now that we have our lights, we're going to add our redshift environment, which is all the volumetrics and atmosphere that's going to add a lot to this scene. So we're going to add that in, and then the scattering comes in really high, so we're just going to bring that down. But you can already see what it's doing. Just adding a bunch of haze. And like I said, we want these to go off into the distance and to kind of really not even see them. Or at least see them fade off. So we want it to be really foggy. And then there's a couple things you can play with here, like the height. I always just put this really high because usually in all the scenes I do, the volume, the fog is kind of covering the whole scene. And then horizon blur, just blur out the horizon. And you can change the color of this as well, the color of the fog. But normally I just I change the color of the lights themselves. So, and we're getting some stuff here from the lights. So let me see if I can push these even higher. Just get them out of the scene. Maybe I'll raise the exposure. Okay. So it's looking good. Now I'm going to I want this to feel like more sci-fi. So I'm going to change the color of all these lights to something like, let me grab all of them. Like a bluish green, kind of. Something like that. And then I can adjust this light. Maybe this is a little too strong right here. Bring it over. Maybe bring it back a little. And then now I kind of want to add another focal point to this. And it's going to be at this kind of front sphere right here. So to do that, I'm just going to add another light. And rotate it this way. Shrink it down a bit. Bring that down. And then I'll change this color to something that's kind of stands out. Okay. And then like it's a very iterative process. Like, you know, once I get to this state, I might go, oh, the floor texture could use some work. I might mess with that a little bit more. Again, the tiling issues, you know, I'd try and go in and fix. And then maybe I might do some additions to the pod. But with the floor texture, let's go in. Let's see if we can make it a little less rough. And maybe we'll even scale this roughness map back down a little bit. And then bring back some of that roughness. All right. So then last but not least, we got to get our little scale guy in there, because you got to show the scale somehow. A lot of people, you know, it's a pretty cheap trick but it works really well, and I feel like there's a reason a lot of people do it, because it does work really well. So we're going to bring our human guy in there. We're just going to frame him up. And just put him like there. That's fine. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. There's a lot more that you can do. Like I said, this is a very, very simple scene. It's basically just 2 pieces of geometry, 2 textures, and just a couple lights. And you can already get something that's pretty atmospheric and interesting looking. And then you can always take this further. Like with a lot of the everydays I do, if I like something, if I do something that I really like, I'll go in later and I'll work on it even more. I'll add more details. I might even turn it into an animation. So there's a bunch you can do. But then another part of the process too is like post correction or color correction. And typically I'll take it into Photoshop and I'll add grain. I'll add some other filters that I really like, some distortion maybe. Just a whole bunch of stuff. I'll fix up any visual inconsistencies, like if it was taking too long in 3D. I can just kind of like paint those out. But Redshift also, in the Redshift camera, they have a really good kind of color correction to just do it in the camera before you even bring it into Photoshop. Like you can add a LUT here. You got your color controls, just like a curve. And then there's also lens effects, where you can add like bloom, which I'll add a little bit of that too. Bring the threshold down, softness up a little bit, and then turn this intensity down. And then maybe I'll go into the color correction, and I'll bring the shadows down. Control click to add a point. Bring the midtones up a little bit. And then you could play with the colors as well. Add some vignetting. But yeah, this is pretty much like the whole process. Again, I did this a little bit faster than I thought I would, but I did this very quickly. Like I said, super simple scene, and you can really just like, the important part about if you were to start like an everyday series is to really, again, time management. If you want to be consistent with it, if you don't want it to kind of negatively impact your life, you need to be able to find ways to do these quickly. And so having an idea that's you're going to be able to do in like 15, 20 minutes, like some days, is really important. And then, I usually use Octane as well, and I've been using Redshift a little bit more recently. And just for any Octane artists out there, it's a really easy switch or transition to pick up because there's a bunch of tutorials and tips by like Maxon and Red Giant on YouTube and like other content creators. And then also it works very similarly, and it's really just about finding the buttons that do the same thing in Octane in Redshift. So that's a really smooth transition. Let me go back to my presentation here. I feel like I kind of covered everything. Oh yeah, and then preset materials, like I mentioned with the content browser, those preset materials are a really great way to start, or like if you're trying to do something really quick, but creating your own materials like I did here is a really great way to get things to be a little bit more unique, to do kind of more fun stuff, and to stand out just a little bit more as making your own materials. And then yeah, like I said, post work is important. Adding the bloom is really important. Any texture, trying to make things look, again, if I always try to go for like a painterly style, so I try and make things look a little bit more painterly. Or if you want to make things look more like cinematic, add a bunch of film grain, and then cleaning up any mistakes. And again, if you're starting like an everyday series, it really is super important for you to post your work. Just having that accountability and having that feedback from other people really gives you the motivation to keep going and keep creating. And yeah, it's just super important. And then the last kind of bit here is it's like totally okay to make bad art. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the everydays that I make, like I said, I treat them like sketches. And so I'm not particularly happy with a bunch of them. I think some of them look really cool and some of them are really good. But for the most part, like, I do them in a day. I do them in like an hour or two. And so it's not really something that I spend a whole lot of time on, like refining and polishing. And some of the stuff does not turn out good. And especially when you're first starting, like it's really hard to make things that you're happy with. But it's totally okay to still make them. Like I said, don't put art on a really high pedestal. It can be a sacred and important thing, but you can also just like create stuff for fun and make things look cool, and it's really not like something you have to stress so much about making things perfect. You can just have fun with it. And I went a little fast here, so I don't really have much more to add. Yeah.
All right, everyone, let's give Josh a big round of applause. First presentation.
Thank you.
Out there in the big world, from every day to the main stage. Anybody have any questions for Josh on him, his process, the tools he uses, the workflows? No. Awesome. Well, you'll be able to find Josh on all of his socials. He's posting daily, so you're going to see his work. So you'll be able to find him there. Outside of that, Josh will be available at our demo station over at Dell for the next hour, closing out the show. And yeah, stay tuned because we're up next is our last presenter of the day, and you're not going to want to miss it, Anders Ram. So hang on, and we will see you after the break.